I'll be honest, at this point, it feels like I've played Resident Evil 4 in more forms and formats than I have fingers on one hand. That said, doesn't mean there still isn't room for at least one more. Say hello to Resident Evil 2D version, because of course this game that heavily relies on maneuverability and the ability to dodge very lethal attacks is definitely going to benefit from being squished down into a 2D plane.
Ooh, nasty.
This latest crime comes courtesy of Doomiro, who has a track record with bringing Resident Evil to Doom. You may be familiar with a few past entries, those being Resident Evil Codename Hunk, and a port of the Mercenaries mode of Resident Evil 4, so I think it's safe to say he might be a fan. And why not? It's a fun series. But ultimately this leads us all back around to the star of the show today, that being Resident Evil 4 2D Edition. Now, it's worth mentioning up front that this is not a full-fat reimagining of the entirety of Resident Evil 4 as of yet. Instead, this is functionally a demo version, a proof of concept going pretty much as far as the opening village. But there's still more than enough to talk about in the space between here and there. Much like the opening of Resident Evil 4, you are escorted to the Granados village, where you get into a kerfuffle with a local villager. This gives you ample opportunity to realize that, oh crap, you probably should set up those keybinds, because man, there is a lot of them. You may have noticed that there's a fair bit of overlap on some of these hotkeys as well, which leads to a little bit of confusion when it comes to what exactly needs to be pressed in order to make the thing that you actually want to happen, leading to me taking a lot of hits to the face when I desperately just wanted to dodge or parry or anything. It's somewhat of a painful introduction, but ultimately something you can still work around the quirks of. That said, reload animations, yeah, those leave you absolutely wide open. There's no way to cancel out into a parry or a dodge, and you best not be within poking distance of anything, that's for sure. Aside from that though, one area in which this mod certainly excels would be in the visuals department, because I mean, just look at it. It is almost a slavish recreation of Resident Evil 4, granted, maybe PlayStation 2 era Resident Evil 4, but it is definably Resi 4 nonetheless. Though one thing that always gets me about Doomero mods is the style of cutting out these 3D models and then converting them into 2D sprites, a process that I can only imagine is tremendously painstaking, so at the very least, I can certainly appreciate the effort there. So, is it actually any fun to play? Well, that depends entirely on your definition of fun. If we're going by mine, well, I just gotta say it's not my ideal way of experiencing Resident Evil 4. The process of 90% of the gameplay here is running to the right, stopping when you see an enemy, popping away at them, and remembering to leave yourself enough room to dodge, parry, or reload. Rinse and repeat this process quite a large number of times. Oh, and don't forget the bear traps, they're fun. But just when you think you're making some headway in that particular direction, it asks you to go the other direction, because there's a basement in that initial building that you need to visit. And this threw me for a loop, not because of the puzzle inside there, not because of the bear trap, literally one step after entering it. It actually threw me for a loop, because I'm not sure if you noticed this, but it's actually flipped the perspective from one side to the other, which causes my brain to emit this low screaming noise. But fear not, we eventually leave the basement, we finally begin heading further to the right, step in a few more bear traps, and eventually reach the Granados village. Now this I was genuinely interested to see, because any of you familiar with Resi 4 will know that the Granados village here is the site of the first major siege of the game. Pretty much a showpiece moment, and in all honesty, I'm impressed with how the setup works here. So even though things are on a 2D plane, there's also points along the path here where you can see demarked by arrows. There are opportunities to head on a different route, allowing you to explore different portions of the village. As for the house section, yep, you can push the bookcase along to block the windows, you can head up the stairs, you can jump out the windows, you knock down the ladders, all of that stuff is present and accounted for. It's just that you're still having to deal with the raw-based gameplay of 2D Edition here, which, again, just doesn't feel the most fun thing to engage with. Doubly so when you're dealing with the chainsaw psychos. Now, my main bugbear with these fellas isn't that they're difficult to fight, they're actually kind of simple. If you've got something like a shotgun, you can just keep plugging away at them, they'll stumble back. The problem here is you always need to reload before they'll go down. And that reload period is utterly lethal. So the only way around this is to leave the room, because they're incapable of following you, reload outside, head back in, and then finish them off. Long section short, you need to off at least 30 Ganados before you can proceed, and in the process you will be able to solve a puzzle here and there to get an extra weapon. You can get some extra grenades from behind saddler portraits, and once you're finally done with that laundry list of murder, this section chooses to cap itself off with an Ultra Chainsaw Psycho. This is your de facto final boss for the Leon run here, and it actually references a hallmark of Resident Evil 3, that being, at certain points, you have a choice on how you want to proceed with certain important encounters. You can choose to run, you can stand your ground, and let me tell you, both of these options are really friggin' frustrating to deal with. I'm not kidding when I say that I was very much tempted to ditch this on the basis of this fight. It was honestly a near vertical difficulty spike, no matter which of these options you choose. The runaway option is admittedly a lot more fun because you get to see all the myriad ways in which this fella is just gonna corner you and chop your friggin' head off, whereas the stand and fight option hems you in to that particular section, and yeah, hope you like using the parry and dodge buttons. But yeah, you'll be using practically every last resource at your disposal, and you're probably going to be seeing this screen a hell of a lot. Mercifully, however, or ominously, depending on your perspective, there is more to this particular mod than just the Leon campaign, because you can play instead as Hunk. And this is much more than playing the same scenario again, just with a different skin. This is practically a full-on fanfic side story using those pre-existing locations so far in the mod, and is genuinely an order of magnitude more fun to experience than the Leon campaign. I would have put this front and center, all things considered. I mean, you get the TMP right off the bat, which tears through the Ganados like they're made out of toilet paper, and you get special guest appearances and fairly involved cutscenes involving Krauser, Salazar, Sadler, the right hand.
Your right hand comes off?
And an ogre. Oh, and the dog. The dog's here. The dog makes an appearance during the Leon campaign, but I'm not sure whether the dog is actually usable during the Leon campaign, because I don't think I ever got to a point where I could trigger that. But the dog can distract the ogre during the Hunk campaign. But yeah, honestly, the entertainment factor of this campaign was so much so that it really redeemed the experience of having to go through the Leon campaign, but not quite. It certainly hangs a lot looser story-wise. There's a lot of comedic interjection, which is also accompanied by an unfortunate boing noise. I'm not kidding, this happens at least like 3 times. And at the very least, it gets plus points for actually letting you use the merchant. But honestly, this makes my head friggin' spin. You don't actually use money to pay the merchant in Hunk mode, you spend morale? But here's the kicker, you're constantly picking up money in Leon's mode, and I didn't see a frickin' merchant the entire time! I mean, what the heck gives? I did find it mildly hilarious that I was expected to do some quick time events where the quick time notification was basically 2 extremely tiny arrows in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Yeah, easily missed, but once you realize it's there and what you need to do, you can just keep spamming the button the entire time and you will do a dodge at the requisite time, every time, without fail. Does this make Krauser look like a fool? Yes, it does. Does it also serve to make Hunk look like the coolest and most competent person in any given scene? Yes, it does. And that's not a surprise, because from what I can tell, the character of Hunk is truly where this author's heart lies. If anything, I feel bad for Ada. She barely gets a look in. She's on top of a building at one point and then just buggers off. Doom Guy's in here, as is Akako, because mandatory Doom cameos in a Doom mod that doesn't actually seek to replicate Doom. And you know what? It was an experience. Is it an experience that I'd play again, knowing that at the end of the Hunk run I'm gonna have to fight 4 consecutive bosses, each with the most tooth-grindingly annoying setups possible? Maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, out of all of them, fighting the right hand was probably the more interesting out of the bunch, because you needed to run into these buildings, fiddle with the liquid nitrogen tanks, and cause them to stagger for a period of time. But yeah, just the length that they drag out for, and the amount of ammunition you gotta dump, and the amount of phases that they go through, it all has the sum total effect of just exhausting the ever-loving heck out of you. I'm not gonna lie, my patience truly ran out multiple times during these fights, and I just decided to enable cheats, which in of itself has an entertaining effect because it actually forces your character to have the chicken hat, and every time you swap weapon it makes a chicken noise, and at this point I just didn't really care anymore. There's only so many hours in the day, and I just want this boss to die! Oh god, I didn't even mention the save system. Don't try and auto-save mid-run. You gotta use the typewriters. If you try and quick save mid-run, things will either break or it just will refuse to actually load at all. And if you can, try and get multiple save slots working if it'll allow you, because once you enter into an encounter with a boss enemy, it auto-saves right at the start of the fight, meaning that it's very difficult to wheel back and maybe scavenge up some more supplies before you decide to throw down. But all in all, a fascinating experiment. And I feel like this is a sentiment I have with a lot of Doom Arrow mods. They're really fascinating in implementation. Not always perfect, but always interesting. And like I said, I can't fault the effort when it comes to the painstaking degree of bringing sprite versions of those 3D models and animations into Doom. But ultimately, it kind of proves to me that the 2D perspective is probably not going to be something that the mainline Resident Evil series is going to attempt anytime soon. Personally, I'm happy for them to stick with 3D, be it third person, first person. Heck, I'd even be interested in top down. But hey, if you're interested in seeing what it might be like playing Resident Evil 4 from a 2D side-on perspective, this mod's got you covered, and why not give it a shot? Maybe you'll have more fun than I did. Just wasn't my particular cup of tea. Also not sure how I feel about the usage of AI voices to replicate the voice lines of Wesker and Leon and Hunk and what have you. It's a thorny issue. I'll leave you guys to argue about it down there in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this video, please by all means, leave me a like. Genuinely helps me out. And until next time, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.